Hello and welcome. Today's going to be a no camera day because I got lots of graphs. I want to take up a corner of the screen. Okay. Let me do a quick audio check. It's been a while. Let's get started. Alright. Looks like I'm good to go. Alright, today we're going to talk about what was kind of the point of the love unit. You might have gone through that last unit asking yourself, well, this isn't really that related to dark patterns, and they're making some shady decisions here, but, maybe allegedly. But there's not really a lot of manipulation going on under the hood. And today we'll kind of get to the point of why I use dating apps to drive it home. Because dating apps play to this exclusion dark pattern more than any others do. It's not to say that only dating apps do it, but in dating apps it's the most obvious, and it's also kind of the maybe the most controversial too. So we'll see if you agree. But first, let's talk a little bit about last time. Last time I led with the question of how you might make more money at the expense of promoting romance, and well, based on your lack of creativity, I decided not to make a whole assignment out of it, but let's just say that most of you said that it was really difficult to do that if you made more money, you would probably also do a good job of promoting romance. That is to say that if you make a dating app that is broadly financially successful, it's probably going to be broadly successful at connecting people for romantic purposes too. And that's probably not an unfair assumption to make. You're probably right to an extent. But there are definitely ways to make money and also not generate romance for certain people. That's something that perhaps nobody had considered too strongly, is that whether you're optimizing for the number of relationships overall, or you're optimizing for the number of relationships for a particular group of people, that's an entirely different thing. So, again, back to your opinion, most people's opinion, that any attempt to make money will probably make the dating app better, and that the best way to make money if you're running a dating app is to make the dating app better so that more people will come to use it. So again, well, what kind of people come to use it? We talked about how more attractive people are obviously more desirable, particularly female attractive people around age 20, the most desirable group of both genders. And, well, how do you attract that particular group? Most people said, well, just make the app better in general for everybody. And then, of course, you'll also get more of the groups that you're trying to focus on. Okay, well, today we'll look at some more potential answers to that question, how you might make money at the expense of promoting romance. Remember as well that most of you said that what matters is, again, those high-value people. In both genders, there are certain groups that are more attractive. So in men, you've got that sweet spot age around 30 where the most women want to get men in that category. Men obviously want to see women in their 20s, early 20s, and then obviously your attractiveness plays in quite a bit. So in general, there's these groups of people that are higher value to the app. And if they have a good experience, then we know that people are going to come to the app in order to try to secure romantic relationships with them, because it's the kind of people that people are after. So they want those people. That means that the more high-value people we can attract to the application, the more people we're going to attract overall, and therefore the more paying customers we're going to attract overall. Which brings us to the question of, what do high-value dating targets want? Well, we know that these people are inundated with requests because they're high value, so lots of people want to date them, so lots of people ask them for a date. And of course, when lots of people ask you for a date, you also end up with a lot of people who are, well, let's be honest, kind of creeps. So let's talk about creeps for a second. I want you to look mostly at these two rows where they break down men and women in response to the answers to these questions. So continue to contact them after saying they weren't interested. About twice as many women reported that somebody did that to them. Sent them a sexually explicit message or image they didn't ask for. I'm sure most of you are surprised that it's only 46%, but yes, only 46% of women claimed that, at least in this survey, which was in 2019 or so. again, twice as many as men. Called them an offensive name. Again, women have it worse, and women have it worse in every category in this department. But also young people have it worse, so people who are aged 18 to 34, and then they break it down again by gender. Young women have it way worse than everybody else. They get a ton of people who continue to contact them after they say they're not interested. They get about loads of sexually explicit images that they didn't ask for. They get called offensive names a lot, and 20% of them say someone threatens to physically harm them on a dating site or app. So, of course, people who are subjected to that kind of behavior are going to leave because, incels, like some of the people in class maybe. It's a joke. Some of the people pretend to be in class, hopefully. Incels reach out and bother them, and of course that's very annoying. But this is also, from what we saw last time, the highest value demographic in terms of attracting them to your dating app. So it kind of stands to reason that one of the things that you would want to do if you operated a dating app would be to drastically reduce the number of creeps so that you can continue to keep this valuable demographic on your app and not have them move somewhere else. Now, luckily for all the dating apps today, at least to my knowledge, and women, you can try to justify this or tell me the opposite, they seem to have about the same number of creeps on them, more or less. So it's not like there's an app that's a standout for not being a creep mine. But I don't know, maybe there is. Maybe there's one app that's less creepy than others. And I'll give you another moment to sort of digest some of these other numbers. The fact that as both men and women get older, they get less creepy messages. For women, it goes down drastically. But strangely, for men at least, that's not necessarily true. Men in their 50s get just as many creepy messages as men in the 18 to 30 category. And actually, once you get to that range where, remember, men are more desirable than women because there are fewer single men than single women, and that age category of women is less desirable to men. So in that 50-plus category, when the tables turn, men get more creepy messages than women do. Except for the continued contact category, men got a worse number in all the categories in 50-plus. But of course, nowhere near the number of creeps as women aged 18 to 34 face. And if they had broken this down further, I bet you that most of the creepy messages would be in the even smaller age category of like 18 to 25, where these numbers are probably even higher. So, another thing that you have to consider in dating is that both genders actually aim up when it comes to online dating, and to an extent when it comes to in-person dating, but it's actually more pronounced in online dating. Both genders actually tend to target people who are more attractive than they are. We all have an internal perception of our attractiveness, and then once we've kind of constructed that, we tend to target people who are slightly more attractive than us. So obviously this is a big disadvantage to folks with low self-esteem because, well, they target people who are less attractive than them because they rated themselves poorly. And likewise, it's hilarious if you have a big ego and you think you're much more attractive than you are. And then also bear in mind, from what we learned last time, is that women tend to rate men very low. The average rating for a man is something around a 2. So if a woman believes she is a 3, and if she's only targeting people who are 4s, well, those are actually like the top 10% of attractiveness in men. But it kind of balances out, and altogether, people generally, if you look at it in percentile terms, tend to target people who are just slightly, we can say, out of their league. About 20% is the sweet spot. We'll look at the graph next. Now, even though both genders tend to do that, women are about twice as likely to get a reply when targeting somebody that's slightly out of their league. We'll note why that's important a little later, too. And everything I just said was a really optimistic way of saying that actually nobody wants the least attractive people. If I'm a 1, I'm targeting 1.5s, 2s. I'm not targeting other 1s. Nobody wants 1s. Nobody's messaging them at all, actually. So the people who are in the low attractiveness category, and attractiveness being physical or whatever else gets people to click on your dating app, but physical, as we saw last time, is a big part of it. Well, those people, nobody wants them at all. And I'm not necessarily putting them in the creep bin just yet, but I'm sure some people might. All right, let's look at the graphs a bit. This is a confusing graph, but here we have women sending out messages, and here we have men sending out messages. In the top left, we look at the number of messages that a woman sends relative to the desirability gap between her and the person that she's sending the message to. So to the left of the dotted line, the men are less attractive than the woman, and then to the right of the dotted line, the men are more attractive than the woman that she's sending a message to. So we see that women send most of their messages to men who are more attractive than them, and the same is true for men. They send almost all of their messages to women who are more attractive than them, but more notable is that neither the women nor the men send almost any messages to people who are outside of this little range here. So within a certain tolerance, both genders will send messages to people who are slightly less attractive than them. Sometimes that still makes up the minority of their messages overall, but once you get to a certain desirability gap, no more messages. Those people are no longer sending out messages. So we don't send messages to people we think are less attractive than us, pretty much. Full stop. Or we hardly do so at all. On the other hand, the replies that we receive, so if a woman was to send a message that was to a man who was substantially less attractive, this category down here where there's almost nobody, there would be almost 100% chance that the man would reply. 1.0 is about 100% chance, right? That's how it works. So your probability of getting a reply is much lower as you send out these messages to more attractive people. That's true for both genders. But remember we said that women get twice as many replies. Well, that's true regardless of the attractiveness disparity. These curves are the same shape for men and women, but the men's curve is just shifted down considerably. So at any attractiveness disparity, women are far more likely to get a reply when they send a message out with the same disparity. This graph is a lot more confusing, so we'll just kind of gloss over it quickly, but it's just the number of messages based on the desirability gap. So we see that people tend to message people who are more attractive much more frequently. It's kind of showing the same thing that this top one was, but we'll just gloss over that. But you have to take into account that men actually send the vast majority of the messages. And remember last time we talked a little bit, I asked you to hypothesize how it works if people were homosexual, if they would act like the gender that they are, or if they would act like the opposite gender in terms of incoming. So, when men rate other men, do they rate them like men rate women, or do they rate them like women rate men? Because that's men being rated, but also men doing the rating. So which one is it? Well, it turns out that in terms of at least sending messages out, when it's a straight relationship, it's the man sending out the first message the vast majority of the time, basically 4 times more often than the woman sending it out. But when the tables are equal, let's say, it actually evens out considerably. And then when the tables are slightly less equal, although really the difference is only one message between gay and bisexual, then again men get a slight forward advantage. So that should kind of answer your question a little bit. Yes, I know, confusing, isn't it, from somebody's question in chat. The first message sent by gay men is sent by men. Indeed, it is sent 100% of the time. All right. And also men tend to reply more, or that is to say that men who get more messages sent to them also tend to send more messages. This is just going back to straight people. So women tend to just send basically the same number of messages regardless of how many they receive. That's why their line is flat. No matter how many messages they receive, they just send, well, this number is below 0, so it's not many. And then men tend to send more and more messages the more messages they receive. So the men, the more active they are on the dating app, the more active they are, full stop, as senders too. Which means if we combine this with the previous finding that people tend to target people who are slightly more attractive than them, well, that means that women's inboxes, broadly speaking, are full of people who are about 20% less attractive than them, because the men are sending out the first message most of the time. The men are looking for somebody who's more attractive, as both genders do. And so women's inboxes are full of messages from less attractive people. Men's outboxes are full of messages to more attractive people. And as it turns out, kind of a side note, it's true that if women send out more messages, so if as a woman you wanted to secure a more attractive man, your strategy would have to be to just send more messages. And that, if you look at the data, actually works really well. If you pick up the sending of messages, you'll get a significantly more attractive partner, because of course you don't have to just deal with the people who are contacting you, who probably think you're more attractive. All right then, back to dark patterns here. Now that we have that information, how do we get less low-value people on our software? How do we get less of these low attractiveness persons? Well, just from something as simple as the number of messages you send and receive, we can easily assign you to the low attractiveness category. Right? We don't even really need to analyze your face or anything. We can just look at how many messages you get, and we can compare that against how many messages other people get. If someone gets a lot, then they're a high attractiveness person, and if they message you, well, then they must think you're an even higher attractiveness person, and so on. So we can really just use message data. We don't even have to be complicated with it. We don't have to do facial analysis or anything. And what we can do once we figure out who the low-value people are is we could just exclude them. We can just get rid of them. We could get them off our dating app, but that wouldn't optimize the amount of money we make. What would optimize the amount of money we make would be to identify how low-value somebody is and then make them pay to compensate for that natural penalty that they have. So what a lot of dating apps do is the lower value that they perceive you to be, or basically the more poor your response rate to messages is, the more money they can charge you. But not too much money, because if you start charging the really, really low value people a lot of money and they pay, well, then your platform can become flooded by creeps, which we know is a problem. So we want to do something different to creeps. We want to just get rid of the creeps altogether. But still, the lower value of the person is, the more they should pay. And in order to get rid of creeps effectively, regardless of whether they've paid or not, maybe, what we should do is get rid of the creeps in a way that's discreet. Because with all software, and even with dating apps, it's really easy to just make another account. Even if you put up barriers to it, like a phone number and stuff, everybody's got another device they can use or something. So a great way to get rid of low-value people, and especially people who are annoying to the application, negative-value people, so creeps in my little example here, is to shadow ban them. Now, when you shadow ban somebody, you prevent them from using certain elements of your app, like your messages being seen by others. But it's done in such a way that you can't tell that it's been done to you. So if you get shadow banned from Twitter or something, you can continue to post, but nobody will see your posts. And to you, it'll just look like, well, nobody's replying to them and nobody's liking them. It can take you some time to figure out you've been shadow banned. And this tactic was first used against the very, very lowest value people, and that is to say bots. And it's still used extensively against those very, very low value people, bots who use the application and just send spam or scam people or so forth. You don't want to let the people running the bots know that they've been banned, and lets them know that it's time to make another one. So you just silently start to not process their message or show them to anybody. But it wasn't long before a variety of different software companies realized that they can do the same to their most annoying and lowest value real users. So this holds true outside of dating, and in fact it's a common tip in business. It's ditch your problem customers. The way it's usually expressed is the top 10 or 20% of the customer base you have are 90% of your problems and headaches, so just get rid of them and use that 80% that's not a headache and isn't constantly calling customer service. And that's not wrong, and it's not bad business advice. The problem is that maybe the group that's getting excluded isn't necessarily creeps. Maybe the group that's getting excluded actually didn't do anything wrong themselves. So here's an example again from the OkCupid blog. This is kind of what got them slightly kicked off the internet, or at least had them take down most of it. It's that attractiveness is kind of racist, and we all know this internally, but I don't think a lot of us really understand how much the penalty is. So this is the race of the man doing the rating of a woman in this case, and they broke it down into 4 categories: Asian, Black, Latino, White. And then the woman's race on the top, so whether the woman is Asian, Black, Latino, White. And then the percentages are just how far off those scores are from the average. So if, for example, an Asian person tends to give women an average of a 3, and remember from male ratings, that tends to be about where men stack up. They give the average woman about a 3. So an Asian man in this case would give Asian women about an 18% higher rating, but he'd give black women about a 27% lower rating on average. Interesting, isn't it? So the data in this table is from OkCupid and then from 2 other dating sites, so Match.com and DH. I don't remember what it's called now. It's less popular today, but that was more of a hookup site. That was kind of like Tinder was at this point. So OkCupid, by the way, is not some kind of crazy racist demographic, right? OkCupid people mostly live in cities. 3/4 of them have gone to college. They're about the same racial makeup as the general population. And 85% of people who are on OkCupid answered the question, would you be uncomfortable dating somebody who held racist views, as yes, they would be uncomfortable. So 85% of people on OkCupid self-proclaim that they would not tolerate racism at all. That'd be a deal breaker for them. And yet at the same time, when you look at the ratings from men of Asian, Black, Latino, and White self-identified race, this is the box that you could tick when you're signing up for an account. You don't have to tick it, by the way, so this is only from people who made the choice. And then you match them against that same self-identified race in the women, you find a couple things. First of all, black women get lower ratings across the board from all races, and they don't even get a positive bias from black men, unlike women from Asian, Latino, and white backgrounds who get a small but significant bump from men of their own race. And on the Match.com data set, at least, that bump is even bigger. So Asian people really favor, Asian men really favor Asian women, Latino men really favor Latina women, white men really favor white women, and so forth. So this is the data for men. While I'm continuing to talk about this, let me, it is a dumb graph from the chat, by the way, but let me ask you this. Do you think that the ratings for women rating men will be, let's not use the word race, but let's say more biased towards their own race or less biased towards their own race? So when it comes to women rating men, do you think that they'll be more biased towards their own race or less biased towards their own race? Also, these graphs used to look a lot nicer when they were on the blog. They had like heat maps and stuff, and they were cool. And I tried to find the original versions, but that's the problem with things getting taken down off the internet. All I have is the crappy, grainy one from the book, where they couldn't print in color ink, and so they don't have a really good appearance to them. But okay, continuing on to the findings. So the penalty that black women get when being rated from all 4 races, basically. Black men essentially rate everybody evenly, so no penalty there. But from the other 3 races, the penalty is basically equivalent to getting 1 out of 5 stars knocked off. So if you're rating on a 5-star scale and you're like a 3 average for real, it's like being rated as a 2 on average instead, which is dreadful. You know, it puts you in the bottom almost regardless of what your actual attractiveness is, unless you stack up in that top 10 or 20%, which very few of us do. Didn't get any answers to whether or not we see that women will be even more preferential to their own race or not, but nobody answers. I'll move on to the next one in a minute. Let's see, there was one more thing I wanted to say about this then. Think about it. Got one answer. Someone thinks that women are less biased towards others, more biased towards their own race. So that's one person thinks that. Let's see what it actually is. It is also interesting that the Match.com data set is so different, considering at the time that this was published, Match was the largest of the online dating sites by a pretty significant margin, and therefore had like the highest kind of sample of the population. It was the biggest, most diverse sample set of people. Well, let's move on then. Okay, so women rating men. So it turns out that for women, the results are way worse in terms of women being way more preferential to their own race, but also way different because unlike black men that didn't experience any particular bias towards any race, actually, we could say that black men have completely triumphed over racism because if you remember back to their numbers, they're pretty much indifferent. Black women have a really strong bias towards black men. In fact, the strongest single bias anywhere in the table, although in the Match data set, the white-to-white bias is slightly larger, and in the whatever DH is, Dating Harmony or something, too, the white-to-white bias is also slightly larger. But in all the other sample sets, we also see that, like black women had a pretty significant penalty to their overall perceived attractiveness, Asian men have not as significant, but actually about as significant, but the same problem. They have a significant penalty when stacked up against women of black, Latina, or white descent. So except for the DH data set, Asian men got a pretty substantial penalty from all three other racial groups. And that penalty is much bigger than just accounting for the fact that all four of the groups had a pretty significant self-preference to people of their own background. And you do have to keep in mind that in America, the Asian population is the smallest, so their sample set was the smallest of those studied, so it could just be some variance in the sample, but considering that all three data sets had about the same effect, well, it's probably pretty fair to say that Asian men, as well as black women, face a pretty substantial bias against them when it comes to their attractiveness rating. And also black men face a somewhat smaller than the Asian men face, but somewhat significant bias too. And you can also say that white people have a pretty significant bias towards them, regardless of the background of the woman doing the rating. In fact, for the Asian data set, they were more preferential towards white men than Asian men, and for the Latina set, again, more preferential towards white men than Latino men, so forth. All right, well, one more source before we go on to what this can tell us about whether or not it's fair to just exclude people. Here we have a couple things that we've already looked at, including the race thing. So first we have your desirability rank over age, but here we just have it as just one number. So they're just showing a bunch of men pictures of a bunch of women, showing a bunch of women pictures of a bunch of men. And here you can see more clearly that female attractiveness really peaks in the 20s and then just drops, and male attractiveness is kind of consistent throughout life, actually goes up a little and then kind of flatlines after like the 30s because there's really no improvement beyond that. And they took people from different cities to make sure that there wouldn't be any, bias coming from a city having a different ethnic makeup or whatever. But then we look at the ethnicity information, and, well, we kind of see the same thing. The Asian men all stacked up lower in the attractiveness ratings than other races did, and the black women stacked up lower in the desirability rank, they call it, not attractiveness rank, desirability rank than others. And of course, the penalty was just as significant as we saw in the dating data set. And one more piece that might be interesting to you is that going to college improves your desirability on both genders. So good for you guys for going to college. But unfortunately, for the women, getting your master's degree does not seem to help you. For men, it's a little bit of a boost. So if that's the tipping scale that makes you want to go to graduate school, you're welcome. All right, so let's say you're some engineer and you go, yeah, I can fix this. I know what to do. I got this. I'll just take the people with the problem and I'll fix the problem for those people. I'll just make a patch. And that's how you end up with racially specific dating apps. JDate definitely being the first and the oldest, and JDate's almost as old as OkCupid. But JDate obviously really big on promoting interracial relationships there, although of course there's also a religious element to consider there. Not everyone there is actually the same ethnicity, but still. And there have been many different attempts over the years to fix the whatever black dating app situation is. There's one of the more recent attempts, a dating app specifically for black people, which is an interesting way to solve the problem, but sort of implies that they're not having as much success on the traditional app. Otherwise, why bother with the alternative? So the algorithm doesn't care why you're rated as a low value, especially if we're going back to the way we were doing it originally, where we just look at how many messages you're getting. Well, that algorithm doesn't give a crap what race you are. It just cares how many messages you get. Remember, we said we could just figure out how attractive you are based on how many messages are inbound to you and the attractiveness rating of the people sending them. Well, in that case, it doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. And of course, most dating apps don't really ask anymore. And we also don't care if that rating is fair if we're doing things that way in general. And we also might not even have an agreed upon definition of fairness, because if somebody doesn't want to date people of a certain ethnic background, well, are they racist for that, or is that just their preference? I don't think people have a universal consensus for that question. Let's look at another kind of attractiveness-related thing before we wrap up to the discussion for today. So this is for job interview requests on a website where you can actually see the applicant, and for the kind of professional jobs where men and women tend to be represented about 50-50. So stuff like clerical work and such tends to be about as many men and women in the careers that are advertised on this particular job site. I don't even remember what it's called. But if we look at the chart and we see how many interview requests the person gets based on their attractiveness percentile, we see that very attractive women get 5 times as much as people in the lowest category. And perhaps somewhat amusingly for men, the men are playing at about the field of a 20th percentile attractiveness woman. But also the attractiveness of the man is largely irrelevant to the number of requests they receive, so they must be being judged on some other criteria. Now, in fairness, there are many different data points on this, so here's another one. In this case, they do also find that a female applicant is slightly more likely to get a reply, significantly more likely to get an interview, significantly more likely to be invited for the job interview, in this case the 7 times increase in likelihood. But they've also found the same effect for men, in this case. Twice as likely to get the phone interview, and again, what is this, about 5 times more likely to get the job interview after that. So whether or not the effect exists for both genders is kind of irrelevant to the question. The question is it cool to exclude those less attractive people? And let's look at some other exclusions too. Let's talk about stuff that's unrelated to gender or attractiveness. How about social media? Well, if you're annoying or you're whatever kind of people that particular social platform doesn't like, let's just downplay the amount of traction that your messages get, and then we can have more of the kind of people that we do like paying more for the product because they like the platform more. TikTok allegedly has a really great mechanism for dealing with bullying. The rest of the internet, historically speaking, has gone after bullies by just banning them or whatever. So if you harass people anywhere outside of 4chan, you're probably going to get kicked off the platform. But TikTok thought about it smart. They had another idea. They said, you know what? If we could just get rid of all those losers who get bullied, then there won't be any bullying on our platform. It turns out that there is a particular kind of person that tends to get bullied. We all kind of know that intuitively. If we just identify the people who are likely to become targets of some kind of harassment and then kind of stealthily downplay their content, then we won't have harassment on our platform. Now that's an interesting idea, isn't it? Because being the kind of person who tends to get bullied, well, having TikTok almost kick you off the platform probably kind of qualifies as a continuation of that. And of course, customer service. If you call customer service a bunch, if you become an annoying customer, then downgrade the level of customer service you receive, and so forth. All across software, we can find examples of situations where the optimal solution for making money is actually to jettison your most low value or annoying customer base. So today's discussion is just about whether or not that is okay or not. So if you're on the moral side, you think that all customers don't need to be treated equally. We can definitely treat the people who are lower value more badly. We can charge them more money, we can downgrade their quality of service, we can kick them off altogether. If you are a lower value customer, not just in terms of your financial, but in terms of what you bring to the platform, because a lot of these dating apps, remember, they don't charge you until you want to pay. So can we treat lower value customers more poorly? If you think yes, then you're on the moral side. If you're on the immoral side, you think that all customers should get about the same service and about the same general treatment. So if I have Tinder Gold and you have Tinder Gold, we should get about the same treatment. And if I have Tinder Standard and you have Tinder Standard, we should get about the same treatment. But you're going to have to define to some extent what same service is and even what same treatment is. Because of course, if I have Tinder Gold and you have Tinder Gold, that does not guarantee we're going to get the same number of matches. You don't have to believe that to be on the immoral side. You just have to think that the service can't deliberately downplay your exposure and deliberately show you fewer people or deliberately show you lower value people just because it's assessed that you're a lower value person too. If you're on the immoral side, you think that services can discriminate on the quality of their offering, but only on certain criteria. So, for example, you might think that dating apps can ban all the fat people or only show fat people other fat people, but dating apps cannot show short people only other short people. That would be immoral wrong. Obviously, that'd be a stupid perspective, but if you're on the immoral side, I want you to say, what do you think are the criteria that are okay to exclude people on? All right then, let's get into it. I will see you there.